All right, we're back. We are COMP125 in the summer 2018 semester, and we are week 4, part 2 of our broadcast, debugging and error handling, which is part 1 of debugging and error handling. We're going to do part 2 tomorrow. Okay, before we start, I said earlier that I'm going to be doing debugging and error handling the Tom way, right? So when I say the Tom way, it means that don't worry about it being like out of this world. It's still going to be what we've always done with debugging and error handling, but I'm going to give you my way of doing things. You may also develop your own way, but this is supposed to help you. I'm also going to use GitHub, right? Because I use GitHub when I debug and error handle all kinds of stuff, right? Why? Because when I raise an error, if there's a problem, I want to note it when I do my development, right? So that we can solve it. So we'll talk about that. So if I go back to COMP125, or lesson 3 last week, and just like last time, I can make a copy of this on my desktop. So I'm going to right-click, copy, right? And you should be able to do this too, and paste. And it's going to make a copy of assignment number 3, or lesson 3, and I'll call it lesson 4. Remember that there will be an exercise tomorrow, probably to do with debugging and error handling, like fix the error, you know, one of those kind of these kind of things, right? So here's lesson 3A. We're going to just make this 4A, right? We don't know if there's going to be lesson 4B tomorrow. I don't know. Before we change things, I'm going to, kind of start Visual Studio Code, okay? And this is some Angular app I was working on. Okay, and let me just put this back over here. Oh, wait. It'd be nice to rename this thing proper instead of copy. How about that? Yay. These are all the normal steps I would take if I was doing this, right? One more thing that I want to do is I want to get rid of this .git folder, right? .git, it holds my all my development information. So if you get rid of the hidden .git folder, you can start a new one, which is what I'm going to do. All right, so then there we go. This goes in there. And now we started off our new project in Visual Studio Code. Yay. Fantastic. A couple things I would change when we're switching projects is change my package.json file to lesson 4A. We talked about that last time. Again, this is for completeness. By no means is this required. I just do it because it drives me crazy when I see something like this. And, I want to make sure that we're up to date, so I'll save that one. And now I want to use the terminal. So I'm going to go and open in command prompt. And just like before, git init, right? I told you you're going to see this over and over again. Git add dot, which means add everything, right? Also notice I'm adding node modules too, right? So I'm not including them. I could include something called a git ignore file, which I'm not doing right now, right? Yes. So the question was, if I don't use the dot, can I individually specify the files? Yes, you can, right? So initial commit. There we go. And then now that I've got this is all local. And what I want to do, by the way, you're going to need to do this with your test in week 7. You're going to have to use GitHub. You're going to have to use Git. You're going to need to do these things. So if you haven't had a chance to practice this stuff, please do so now, right? I don't know what you're doing if you're not doing this stuff. It's really required. But also, some people say, well, I never use GitHub. I don't use any kind of version control when I do development. I'm too quick. Yeah, slow down is my answer, right? Because otherwise, one day you're going to need to do it, and then it's going to be a bad thing. You're not going to do it. You're not going to know how. You're going to be in trouble, and I won't be able to help you because you'll be graduated by then, right? Developing your own habits and so on. That's me. All right, and sorry, I'm checking because I have multiple accounts. Okay, so here I am. I'm in GitHub. I'm making the same lesson name, so COMP125 S2018 lesson 4A. Right? That's what it is. Notice it has a check mark that says it's unique in my Centennial College account, right? I'm making it public. I'm not initializing with the README. I'm not adding any git ignore file. I'm just clicking create repository. And when I do that, I get this instruction, which I'm going to copy paste. So I'm going to copy here, go back here, right click on here, and press enter. And then we're good. It'll push it up to GitHub. And now you have what I have, okay? Starting off. So that is lesson 4. Our initialization. Any questions so far? This should be all review for you. Yes?
We need to make sure that all the data is correct here.
Not required. I like doing it because for completeness, like I said, it's not really necessary, right? No. You're not producing an npm package, right? When you make your own package, yeah, then it's required. But in this case, I'm just doing it because I want everything to be good. All right, so we've done this. We've got our stuff happening. I'm using my built-in terminal that's inside Visual Studio Code, so you can see my commands and I don't have to switch back and forth, right? We're using a PC. Normally I do a Mac. Like in my previous semester, I was using a Mac. I may switch in the second half because then you already know how to do all this stuff, so you don't have to look at me doing it on PC. You can actually say, it's okay, Tom, it's the same commands. I may switch. It doesn't matter. You should be platform agnostic. All right. I know that people are like, PC is the best, Mac sucks, or Mac is awesome, it never breaks, PC sucks. Don't say anything like that. Just say, I'll use whatever is the best platform at the time. And for a lot of times, I'll tell you right now, in my experience, it's Mac over PC. It's easier to set up, easier to maintain, no viruses, and I can do things twice as fast, right? But I want you guys all to know how to do things on PC because most of you have PCs. That's why I'm using a PC in this course so far. All right, and then just in case I need to use Visual Studio for whatever reason, not available on the Mac, that's another reason I'd have to use it. There is a Visual Studio Community Edition available on the Mac, which is very different. It's not Visual Studio 2017. And if they ever had that, I'd be really, really happy because I like Visual Studio a lot. It's just, it's different. Okay, so we're talking about debugging techniques, and we've got our little project. So, imagine if you've got your scripts and you're trying to debug, this big file that we've been using over the last little while, right? It's a massive file. I'm just going to show it to you again. And it's one big file and a lot of stuff. And I've got a bunch of these comments, which I'm going to remove today, right? Because, this is just for you for last week. Last week was loops. You guys should know all these different kinds of loops we talked about, at least at a very high level. I don't expect you to know everything, but there should be, at least some peripheral knowledge of how to do different kinds of loops in JavaScript. We also talked about the exactly equals operator, three equal signs instead of two, which is a little different. And exactly, it works especially with not exactly equal, as well as greater than equal, and a bunch of other ones. And we also talked about the ternary operator last week. That was the other thing we talked about. So those three things that we really focused on, just to get you guys, knowing kind of the nuances, a few nuances in JavaScript. We talked about associative arrays, which are really weird and different than we haven't seen before. Associative arrays are like creating properties for an object, right? As opposed to an array that you can loop through. You can't really loop through an associative array, right? That was probably an issue with it. So I'm going to introduce an error, and we're going to try and find it, right? So, and I'm going to say find it as in something else. So for example, I'm going to put lis, right, in here from my list. I made a mistake, let's say, right? I'm also going to take away the G, right, or the N in thing, right, to see what happens, right? Because this is all about error handling and debugging, right? I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to run it. So again, in my integrated terminal here in Visual Studio Code, I can add another one. And let's make it so that we can view it. I'm simulating a server here. So I'm going to use light-server, right? Which is going to generate this, browser sync enabled server. There we are. And if I click my console, so if I go to inspect, we've been doing this actually every time. I've kind of talked to the console. Okay, so I got nothing. And immediately you look at it and you're like, wait a minute. Something's wrong, right? Isn't it? If I go to my About page, right, I see my About button is clicked a bunch of times, right? But something's wrong. It's not doing what I'm supposed to do. It's supposed to take me to my About page, yeah? And if I click my About page, there we are. Now I get an error. So I get this error, and I'm like, okay, cool. Here's my first element is Peter. Okay, the name is Tom, and I got this reference and says thing is not defined. Okay, so this is the first error we're going to get. So this is the easiest kind of error to fix, these errors, right? Where I get an uncaught reference error, thing is not defined, thing. I'm like, what the heck is thing? Well, if you look on the right here, you can see app.js 101. It tells you where in the JavaScript file the error is. Very simple. So we're going to click on it. And then we see that there's an error, right, where it is on line 101. And if you expand this a little bit, So you can change the size of these things. You can see that it actually underlines the error. Thig on line 101. Hey, oh yeah, we're doing a for each loop. When we're looking for thing, it's supposed to be thing, not thig. That's the error. Yeah. So that's the first error. But we also have another problem. Another problem is it's supposed to list my favorite things. Yeah, give it a second, right? This is the way to do this, right? So one is we use the console. This is the first thing I would look at. Look at the errors, look at the console, take a look at this kind of stuff and see if you could figure out what the error is. This is the easiest way of figuring it out, right? But let's say I can't understand it. I don't know what it is. It's eluding me because sometimes we look at it and we're looking right at it, but we don't understand it, right? Especially with JavaScript. You're looking at it and you're like, what the hell? Why is Thig not working? Well, Thig, thing, right? So this isn't right, right? So I can figure this out. So now I can easily just jump back to JavaScript, right? And I can look at line 101. It's the exact same line that it says here, line 101, right? It tells you which line it is. And you can go back here and go, well, it should be thing. But wait a minute, how come this bloody thing wasn't underlined? No pun intended, right? How come this wasn't underlined? It's not, there's no such thing as thig, right? But it didn't complain. That's a problem, right? I mean, for me, whenever I look at an editor and I don't have a squiggly little line that I'm used to in Visual Studio, I'm like, what the heck? This sucks. It should tell me that there's an error right here, right in the editor, right? So we'll come back to that. There is a way of doing it, but I'm not going to talk about it today, right? So here we have an error. I mean, if I put this back here, I can see now the thing is a string, right? Thing connects to this thing. And if I press save and I go back, you can see that when the page is refreshed, you can see that there's no error anymore, right? So if I go back to console, no error. Okay, so we've got our UL ID is my favorite things. That's cool. But where's my list? Where's my list, right? And it says video game, movies, cars, space, and flight all in one thing here, right? What the heck? This isn't what I was supposed to get. Why is this? Now, this is a different kind of error, one that's more difficult to see. There's no error here, right? But there's got the wrong output here, right? This should be a list, but I'm not getting a list. I'm getting like all these items all in a row. That's wrong. So something is wrong with this list. Why am I getting this error? So you can't look at it here. Console is going to show no errors, but this is going to show a problem. So one is a syntax error. We made a syntax error. Truly, we still have a problem, right, with our syntax. We're looking for a hook. We're trying to hook into an object that doesn't exist, but it's not so easily apparent from here. We didn't give us an error here, right? It's not going to error out because this could be right? I don't know, some weird element that I'm trying to hook into called li, right? I'm creating an element called li, but there is no li element. Well, hold on. Does it tell you anything here, right? So if I open up this, right, kind of open this up, I get lis. Is there any kind of thing like lis? No. I mean, if you looked at it, some people don't even look at this error. They'd be like, there is no such element as lis. That's the problem. That's one way you could have detected it. But immediately when you look at this, when you first look at it, there's nothing that says error in your face to say, it's here, I'm here, I got the error here, fix me, right? It doesn't tell you that. It just is good, but we got an error here. So the other thing to do would be to kind of expand this one and to look down here. But if you didn't do that, it'd be hard to see, right? So we're looking back in our code. We're going, what's happening here? Let's look through our code. So what I could do is look through it, you know, where I think the error is. Imagine if I have code like really, really big like this, right? And I'm like, okay, this is messed up. It should be, I'm looking down where I think it's supposed to be because I'm doing it over here in my associated array. I'm looking at my favorite lists, and I want this to print, you know, and I'm like, okay, so I got my list here. So why isn't it printing out? Well, probably in the for loop somewhere. That's my thinking, right? Because it's going to loop through. Here's my for each, right? And it's looping through each of the items, and then maybe I don't catch it. Maybe I look at it, I'm looking right at it, but I'm not seeing it. It's possible, right? It happens to the best of us. Happened to me lots of times. So I'm going to, somehow, I want to be able to pinpoint this. So one thing I could do is use console commands like we've been using all the time. So something like console log and something like new item, right? Because I can actually look at new item and see what this new item is every time, right? So I can see what the new items I'm adding on. What are they, right? So this is one way to catch this. So I didn't see this. I didn't look. I'm looking right at it, but I didn't see it. I'm putting a console command in there that, you know, for debugging, and maybe I probably put in some kind of, you know, debugging only, right? Remove when done. Remove when working, right? Something like that. A message to myself saying, hey, this is only debugging. I'm only debugging with this one, right? Right, cool. I'm going to go back, and now I see the problem, right? Because as I loop through, I'm like, LIS, what the heck? There is no LIS. I didn't bother doing this, but this is in my face, guys, right? I've looped through, and I see the problem, and now I can go back and correct. And if I just do this and correct, you can see now that I get my list, which is right here, right? And I'm back in operation. So I don't need this little loop through anymore, right? So I can get rid of this. So that's the second type of error. Still easy. Okay, nice and easy errors. Okay. It's when you have this convolution of stuff, right? Where I'm doing comparisons like this, you know, where my array is equal. Can I do this? Is this possible? But this is a dreaded command, right? That people do, right? So this is always true, right? So what if, you know, I'm looping through, and this is the problem. Will JavaScript catch you here? No. C++ will. C# will. When you compile, it's going to say, whoa, what are you doing? You're actually assigning here. This is not what you want to do, right? You're assigning this. When I assign this, the assignment is always true, so this is going to be always true. I'm always going to see my first element is Peter, even if my first element, right, is Jake. Isn't Jake? No real affiliation with Jake that works here. But let's say I want to make Jake, right? So I'm looking for Peter as an example. You know, whatever. My first element is Peter, and I can do that if I'm looking for 25, right? I'm changing it to Jake, and I'm also modifying the age to, I don't know, let's put him closer to what he is, 45, right? And, you know, it's going to say my first element is Peter when first element is Jake, and it's 45, right? It's really weird. Why? Because this is always true. I'm assigning. Because I'm assigning, the assignment is going to work, so therefore it's true, always. It's almost like putting this instead. If true, right, then do this. Well, true is always true, so therefore it's always going to be a console log, right? So that's an error that it's difficult to catch, right? Because we're like, what the heck? Why is this always happening? And this is a typo that you know, JavaScript is not going to catch, right? So a good example of that is my first element is Peter, but when I look at it, I look at my list. Here's my, you know, here's the, if I want to see the list, it's not true, right? And we don't print the list anywhere anymore. We're actually associating my favorites. But let's just print the list. So just help me out here. I want to like loop through this list here, right? And I kind of did it differently down here. What would I do to loop through the list? Any recommendations for me? I want to loop through this list, my array. I can do a for loop. Let's do a different one. I want to do a for in. If we can remember what the way to do a for in is. How about our visitor? Tell me how to do a for in loop. Yeah, you don't know? For, we look at in, right? This is the easy way to do. This is the cheating way, right? For in, right? It tells us how to do it. Yeah, this is what I would do. My key. What would be my key? My key. What do I put in here in my key for in? Index, right? And then when you look through, the object would be the array of my array, right? There's my array. And then you wouldn't do this, right? But you'd want to keep this element is equal to const my array. I want this const my array. I want to just show you this thing, so I'll do a console log. Right, so we do a my array index. This is an indexed loop because we have the index here, except we're not setting it up as a var or let index equal to 0, where index is less to my array dot length index plus plus. It's not that kind of for loop. It's we're not looping through that way. We're using the iterator that's built in, and this is a shortened way of doing it, a for in, right, which is actually much closer to C++ syntax. Believe it or not. All right. Anyway, so let's see if this works. So cool. We're kind of iterating through. We see all the all the names, right? So here's all the objects that we're getting. And we see that Jake is at the beginning. So that's one thing we do. We set up some kind of loop and we some kind of console log. Like, what the heck? Jake is first, but we're getting Peter. What the hell? That's wrong, right? Well, how do we fix that? So then we kind of look at we look at our check. Here we go back to our check. My array is equal to 25 as an example. And we're like, oh man, it's an equal sign, because we're going to check to see that what's going on, right? Maybe you didn't see it though. So what are you going to do? There's ways of checking it. So let's do another console log. You didn't see this. Somehow, for whatever reason, you're looking right at it again and you don't see it. This is the best. These are the most difficult things to catch, right? So we do a console log, and we're going to say my array, right? Actually, we'll do it beforehand, before it comes in here. That's what we probably would do, right? We're like, something's wrong. Why can't we see it, right? And we're like, my array, 0. We want to print that out. We want to print out the age of my array 0. So before we go in here, we want to print it out. So we do a console log, and we print out my array 0. And we're like, what the heck? Like, it should check. It's not 25, it's 45. Look, I know it's 45, whatever this value is, right? So if I go back to my thing here, we can see that I'm getting 45. That's the thing, but somehow it's getting to Peter. I don't understand, right? So here, sometimes what happens is we get a result, and sometimes it doesn't match what we see in here for whatever reason. So we can use built-in debugging techniques. There's a built-in debugger in Visual Studio Code that I want to introduce you to. It's very, very efficient and good, right? So what I can do is I can create breakpoints. This is like Visual Studio. You should know how to do breakpoints for Visual Studio. So first of all, notice that there is a gutter in the editor, right? I have my editor, and on the left, there's a gutter. This gutter, if I'm hovering over, I can see these little red dots come up, right? So I want to put one just after this. So just when I'm checking my if statement, I want to put one right here. Okay. Here's my little debug point or break point, if you will, right? And if I just do this, meh, doesn't do anything, kind of thing. Because here in Visual Studio Code, and I'll save this thing, if I go back, it doesn't do anything here. Okay, it still runs like normal, whatever, just the way this is done. And, notice that right here, this is only in the editor. So how do I enable this debugging point or breakpoint to work? Well, there is this little bug that says debug, right, in Visual Studio Code. If I click onto it, it shows me a couple of things: variables, watch, call stack. This is really cool, right? And I really like that they've included this in Visual Studio Code. Now, notice this debug up here on the top. There is this one that says configure for fix launch.json. That's what it says. Just be careful. It also says no configuration. This is because we don't have a built-in configuration right now for Chrome. If I kind of do this, I can add a configuration, right? It tells me that I can choose, attach to local.NET Core console. That's not what we want. You might have other configurations in here: Node.js, VS Code extension development, and there's a bunch of other ones that you have in here, which is nice. But we don't want any of these, okay? What we want actually is to actually just, I'm just going to undo this change because this is a launch configuration, which is what it does is the type is Node by default. So let me just undo that change. What it actually did was it added in a launch.json file in my .vs Code hidden folder. We're just going to remove that for now because that's not what I want. Because you're going to try and do this and you're going to go, didn't work, right? So let's go back. So go back to the debugging. And again, I'm looking at this. I'm going to click this plus button, and it's going to go, well, there is no configuration for this thing, and I want it to run. So it does absolutely nothing, right? It says that there's no debugger attached. So that the problem is that there isn't it's going to look through and trying to find a reference error with this thing. Here's my debug console, and you can see that it's not really working. Like my debugging isn't working, right? It says listening on 101.41. It says for help, see Node.js, but I don't have any kind of debug configuration, and so my debugger is not working. Okay, what I really need is to configure. What I really want to do is configure this debugger so that it has other options. Now notice that it says type is Node, right, and request is launch. launch program. What's the program that's going to launch? Index.js doesn't exist. So this isn't going to work. That's why it's having a problem. What we need to find is a configuration, right, for Chrome, right? So from a Chrome debugger or whatever, right? And if you don't have it here, it will never work. So notice it says add configuration. You can add as many configurations as you want. .NET is definitely not the one we want because .NET is using a system that we don't have here, right? I haven't attached it anyway. There's Node.js. If you're doing a Node.js, no problem. What about VS Code extension development? Well, that's no good, right? Because we're not extending VS Code in any way. What we want to do is just do a Chrome extension. That's what we want to do. So let's look it up. So I'm going to go back over here, and I'll say Chrome debugging, VS Code. How do we do that? How do we add an extension for that? Debug your JavaScript. And there's a great little thing in here which says, here's your VS Code debugger for Chrome, right? And it looks like an extension. That's what it looks like, right? So getting started, install the extension, restart VS Code, and open the folder. But this is really what we want, right? So where is this extension, right? It's called a debugger for Chrome, right? And if I click install, I'm just showing you how to do this. It says Visual Studio Code is required to install this extension. Do you want this? Continue. Open in Visual Studio Code, right? Here's my debugger for Chrome, right? There's also, you can also go here and do it, right? It absolutely will be, right? And if I click install, right, it's going to install this little VS Code thing. And then here's all my extensions. I have a lot of extensions that I've installed, tons and tons of them, right? Because I use VS Code for a lot of different things. And if you notice, there's a bunch of different other extensions that I have in here. Like it says 7, but I actually have a lot more, right? So I'm going to reload for this thing to work. If I don't reload it, my extension for Chrome won't work. So reload, which reloads my Visual Studio Code, which stops my my connection to my page, and so on, right? So if I wanted to see that now, you can see that I have debugger for Chrome, which has been installed, right? And if I searched for it instead, if I went here and went debugger, there's debugger for Chrome, you can see that there's a debugger for a bunch of other stuff too, right? For Unity, if you're programming in, games with Visual Studio Code, and a bunch of other stuff, okay? But we don't care about those. We only care about this one. And if you look at it, there's actually, if I click on Microsoft, right, you can see that Microsoft has a bunch of extensions. So Publisher Microsoft, there is a bunch of extensions that Microsoft creates, right? And extensions in Chrome allow you to extend the functionality of Chrome to add additional things. So you can see there's like tons and tons of stuff that Microsoft has made just for Visual Studio Code, okay? No debugging, latest TypeScript and JavaScript, and a bunch of other stuff. Okay, that's Microsoft. You can always talk about recommended. There's on the bottom here of extensions, we haven't talked about this, there's recommended, there's something called TSLint, beautify code in place for VS Code, right? And we can always look at the extension to see if it's good. So here's something from HookieQR, right? What does it do? It usually tells you what it does, right? It beautifies code, right? It changes different things. JS hint, which is a hinting algorithm. We're going to talk about this. ESLint, which is something else we're going to talk about today or tomorrow, right? And a bunch of other ones, like GitLens, which I highly recommend. GitLens is really cool, right? We'll install a bunch of those things today. Git Project Manager, allow you to change easily between Git projects, right? We can do all this kind of stuff. There's tons and tons of extensions, and these are the under recommended right now. There's 8 recommended. There's 7 installed. 7 installed C++ and C# in here as well, because I do some of that, right? And now we've also installed this debugger for Chrome. Yay. All right, going back to my project, I need to change my launch.json. Let's just delete it one more time, because that launcher was just for Node. We don't have a Node application. We have a Chrome application, right? Because we're doing Chrome. I'm going to go back to my debugger here. And now you can see it says, launch program, right? That's what I want, launch program. And if I click this little button right here, right? what it should do, it says, what do I want to debug? I want to debug Chrome. And now it's created a debugger for Chrome. So all it's done is really, this thing is, the type is Chrome, request is launch, name, launch Chrome against localhost. That's what it does. URL, localhost 8080. So it doesn't use localhost 3000. It's another port altogether, right? And it says web root, whatever the folder is, okay? Now it's not launched. This is just, it just created this thing for now. So the first time you do this, it does this little piece of code for you. And where it sits is inside the VS Code hidden folder under launch.json. That's what it does. So you should have that under your VS Code folder. Okay. New project, yeah. Yeah, not the extension. The extension is in your Visual Studio Code forever, right? But what it does do is allow you to do this Chrome debugging stuff, which is what I want to do. All right. All right, cool. So now if I click on this, this should work. What it should do is launch another version of Chrome here. Now, if it does this, sometimes it'll do this kind of thing. And I apologize for this, right? But what this is trying to do is, hug localhost 8080 with my my stuff. And sometimes what we need to do is we need to close and reopen Visual Studio Code. Sorry, but it happens sometimes. All right. Notice this is malfunctioning because there is no, right now we're not running it anymore either, right? And I have to rerun this. Let me just update this for a second. So I'm going to go back here, relaunch this. This is Visual Studio Code. So one thing normally what I would do is in my Debug Console, so I'm back into here, into my my project. I'm going to look at, sorry, down here, I'm going to open up in terminal, open command prompt in terminal like normal. There's my terminal. I can also click on the terminal window, and I would just do the normal thing I normally do, light server, right? Because what happens is I've closed down and reloaded Chrome, so then the browser sync is lost. Okay. Cool. And I've also installed an extension, and sometimes the reload doesn't help. And sometimes you'll get a problem here. That's why I'm trying to tell you. It works a lot of the time. Sometimes my debugger for Chrome doesn't work, right? So I'm going to show you other tools you can use too. But this is how it normally would work. So now that we have this launcher, right, I should be able to just to press this button. As long as I have some kind of breakpoint, it should stop, right? So if I click this and I open it, as an example, it should launch and run everything here, another copy of it. Now it's not doing so, and it's totally fine, right? Because what it's supposed to do is host another connection to Chrome. If it doesn't, you can always test to see if Chrome is even working by putting in localhost 3000, right? So if I go localhost 3000, I should be able to pull up my application right here, okay? Now there's a couple things that it does. Notice that in my debug console, I get the debug stuff, okay? But that's what it does. The other thing that it does in this version of Chrome, this second Chrome, I got two Chromes running, right? One that's running down here, right? And one that's running over here. Notice this one is running this one. And it could, by the way, it could be failing because I'm also connected to the internet and broadcasting live. All right? Just saying, right? For you, it might be working. I don't know. For me, it doesn't work for you either. For me, I have problems sometimes when I do this. It could be the port. It could be blocked. But anyways, if you look at this, if I look at inspect now, and if I look at my console, right, it says fail to load resource from the server. Okay, that's fine. But here, if I click on my about page, let's go to my about page here, I can see now that it's gone into the debugging mode. You see that? It's only going to work if I'm on the page that I'm trying to debug. So it's actually gone into debugging mode, right? The debugger is actually running here in Chrome. And it's using the built-in debugger that's part of Chrome to make this work, okay? We'll go back to the built-in debugger in a bit. First of all, I want to make it run through Visual Studio Code. So what does it do? In Visual Studio Code, it gives me this. It says, here's my local. My this is undefined. We haven't talked about this yet. My array empty is false. So it gives me a bunch of variables right here in my local variables. Here's my content, right? For HTML, my HTML collection that I'm getting. And I can expand this if I like, right? And I've got my sentence and my number, 3.14159, because I've made my number pi, right? Here's my paragraph, right? And I can look at all the variables that I want. Now, so here I can also hover over. If in Chrome, in Visual Studio Code, as long as I'm in debugging mode, I can hover over to get a value. So if I hover over this, I can see that I've got a value, and I can see the value of my entire array right here, which is awesome. This is live data, right? And now that I see this, now some of you might be going like, I don't get what I'm looking at here. You're looking at actual variable, values. I'm looking at the value of my array, right? And I'm doing that because I'm in debugging mode. Notice now that the little circle has got this little yellow area here. That means that I'm actually in debug mode. So what do I do here? I mean, it's stopping me right where I told it to stop. It's showing me my values, because this is my value. So my console log is 1. So this is my debug console, right? It's showing me everything that's normally in the console that I normally see. But one thing it preserves, if you notice here, what it preserves is when I switch pages. It doesn't preserve that on the page, right? When I switch pages, the previous console log is gone, right? When I switch pages, because the new page is loaded. So therefore, that part of the console in Chrome is gone away. Okay? So say that again. When I do a new page, it reloads my JavaScript file, and so therefore my console is wiped out and cleaned up, right? So whatever was in my console in a home page is gone. And here, it keeps it. Any changes I make, it keeps track of the console. This is really useful. So if I have multiple pages and I'm trying to track data going from one page to the other, which we're not even near that right now, right? This is a way of doing that. We can actually track the data that's happening on the page, right? This is the Tom way of doing things, guys, right? It's not in the book. So notice I have access to everything here like normal, like I would normally have in my console. I can still do things, and I have an interactive console right down here in my debug log, my debug console. So down on the bottom, I can actually literally put whatever I want, whatever is available, and I can try it out here, right? But this is the most area that I like to watch. I like to watch variables, closure. If I look at closure, this area here, so there's a bunch of areas here, right? If I look at closure, closure talks about some of the functions that I've defined. Each of the functions, remember we talked about closures, is a closure. It's a different scope, right? So each function is a scope, okay? So if I look at some of these functions, we care about the about content function, right? So in that scope, you can see that, let me open this up again. You can see that I've got arguments, I've got a length, I've got some prototypes, I've got some other information that may not make any sense to you at this point, all right? But notice that scopes inside of my my about content, that's the closure that I'm looking at, okay? Again, for now, when it comes to closure, it may not mean anything to you. So let's leave that alone. There's actually a script. So this is another thing that we can look at. Here's my app, object title, COMP125 about, right? And you can see that my title is COMP125. That's one of the things that I'm returning, right? And how do I know that? Because further down here, I've got this return document.title. So my app object itself is returning the title of my document. That's what I've done last time, okay? So again, if I hover over it, you can see that I get information about the title, right? And depending on what I'm hovering over, this is the object, the document object, and this is the title property of the document object. Remember, the document object is the HTML page that I'm looking at right now. All right, so lots and lots of information that happens when I press this, when I go to my breakpoint. Okay, what about, so that's local. So notice I get local scope variables, because why? Everything is inside this local scope that I've created called this app, right? This app object here, right? Which is actually an IFI, an immediately invoked function expression, a closure of its own. That's why it's coming up on local. How about global? Do we have any global variables? If I click in there, you can see that there are some global variables, but none of ours. These are global variables that have been created by the application itself, but none of these variables are ours. We can always go and look at any one of these variables on the console, right? So, but these aren't our global variables, right? They're only the global variables that come from the application. And that's why it's so important to do an IFI, right? Because it encapsulates our variables in a closure so we can analyze them. Otherwise, they're in this big, massive scope with a bunch of other stuff that have nothing to do with our application, right? All right, so that's the variables part. Watch is if I'm watching something. We'll talk about that another day, not today, because this is enough as it is, believe it or not. And I've got this call stack down here. Anyone remember what a call stack is? Have you ever been told what a call stack is? I think we talked about it once. So a call stack is, think about the stack as a stack of cards. I always like to think of it like that, with a first in, last out kind of function. So I put a stack. I have a bunch of cards, whatever, and the cards are function names. Let's just put them on. And when I first call the first function, right, I put that on the stack. And then I call the second function, I put that on the stack. And I put the third function, I put that on the stack. And I keep put stuff on the stack over and over again, right, for every function that I call. When I'm done with that function, I pop it off the stack, right? So I can push it on the stack and pop it off the stack. And when I pop it off the stack, I remove that function, right? Well, you can see that what's happened is on the call stack, I've got a couple of functions. One of them is start. Why is start on the call stack? Because that's the one we called to initiate all this other stuff, right? That's the first one we see. Then there's some anonymous functions. We have an anonymous function on line 143, right? Let's take a look at 143. What else is on the call stack? Here's an anonymous function. Add event listener, right? So this event listener is actually on the call stack, right? Because we call the function right away when we started the program, right? And we also have another one on line 151. Right, which is this function, which is the original IFI that we're calling, the immediately invoked function expression. So I call this one, I put that card on the stack. Then I call this one, I put that card on the stack. And then I call the start function, put that card in the stack. Now I'm into the about content function, put that card in the stack. So right now it tells us where the error is. We're inside of the about content function. That's where the error came from. And that's how the call stack works. The top of the stack is the last function that was called. Right? So if I look at the call stack, I can go, oh yeah, hey, here's my error. It's inside this function somewhere. This is where it stopped for whatever reason. Okay? So even if you don't have an error point, and by the way, C# works exactly the same way. C++, exactly the same way. Java, exactly the same way. It's just that Debugger is a little different because you're using Visual Studio Code, and normally you'd be using Visual Studio, and maybe you're going to be using some other application for Java, most likely IntelliJ IDEA or, God forbid, Eclipse, right? One of those two things. And that's why it works the way it does. So any questions so far? So again, debugging in Chrome using the Chrome extension. You should be able to do that. Now we have some commands. Let's go back up to my little breakpoint. Notice on the right, I've got this fat little toolbar. You may or may not see it that way in your Visual Studio Code. Notice that there is no red marks that tell us where the problem is, right? Normally in Visual Studio, you see the error. The error will come up physically here. Right here, we have a breakpoint as an example, but we don't have anything that tells us where the breakpoint is on the right. I wish that was true, but it's not. On the left, we see this breakpoint, and we're looking at my array, 0, which is the first element of the array, dot age property. I'm trying to inspect the age property here. And again, I've done that. If I hover over my array, you can see that the age property is 45. I can actually see that in element 0. I have 7 elements in the array. I can see that here in debug mode. And I can go through each one of the elements and look through them. And there's additional information that I'm ignoring for now. Like, for example, this prototype. What the heck is that prototype? We'll talk about that later. But if you notice, inside this prototype, there's a bunch of other information, right? That's why I'm ignoring it right now. Let's ignore it. Let's keep ignoring it for now, but it's there, okay? So now you can see that this is, and also this prototype up here. This is another prototype, right, that we're looking at. It tells us the length of the array, which is 7, which is a good thing. Now these buttons up here, what are they? They are step over, step into, step out of, right, and restart. There's also stop. Okay, so these are all the controls we have. So what does step over do? Well, if I step over, it goes to the next command. Okay, that's what it does. And if I keep stepping over, I can actually inspect each one of the lines, right, that I have, and whatever changes to the local variables will appear on the left-hand side, right? And also the names of this kind of stuff. Like, for example, this array here at this point is, notice it's a empty array container. That's what it does with a length of 0 at this particular point in time, right? However, if I come to here, you can see now that I have still a length of 0 because it's an associative array, right? But I have a name property that's Tom. Here's my name property, Here's Tom. And here at this point in time, we have that. Here, we don't. We shouldn't if I backed it up, right? But what about this one? How come this one doesn't show up? Because the breakpoint is right here right now. It's on age. Age has not been executed. So wherever the line is, hasn't been executed. And if you notice where I put my breakpoint, I put it after the line I wanted to read, right? I put it here, not on the line. If I put it on the line, that line is not executed yet. So I have to do it this way. Has anyone not done debugging? You guys should have all done debugging right now, right? You done it in C#? You know? Some people say no. No? Okay. No? No? Okay, good. So this is the same thing in C# in Visual Studio. You get the exact same stuff. Yeah, almost exactly the same. Well, this is the kind of way the debugging techniques we're going to be using, right? So again, notice I can step over. I can step into. Step into is usually if I want to, step into some kind of other function. It'll step into that function, figure things out, and then it'll come back out. Now, if I press step into here, there's nothing to step into, right? Let's take a look. No, so it'll just step over, right? So it does the exact same way. But once I come back, if I click step out, we're in a function. Remember, we're in this function called about content. That's the function we're in right now. So if I click step out, now we're out of content, and now look at the call stack. The call stack is switched to start. We finished about content. About content is done, and we're out of there now. We're finished doing that. Now we're back into start. And if I click this, kind of step out again, notice that I'm going to get this really weird thing happening, right? Where I'm on this on-ready state change, and I get this massive, piece of code here where it says browser sync, because that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of connecting to this JavaScript file to make my browser sync up. Remember, Light server is running in the background. That's what's happening. All right, so that is really how it works. The step into and step out of. We can also restart. If I restart, you can see it comes back to this point here. I can also continue. Continue will continue my application as if there's no breakpoint, right? And the breakpoint will remain. I can also stop debugging, so I can stop the application. Notice that my Chrome application stopped, so it's just stopped debugging altogether. And that's how we really would like you to do debugging. If you think about it, have some kind of control over the variables, look through the call stack, understanding what of the functions have been called, to go through and analyze what the problems are. Okay, this is an easy problem to solve. We know what the issue is. I would have spotted it by now because this is where the problem is, right? I'm like, oh man, I'm assigning. I'm not checking. I'm not going to check this. I can add and remove breakpoints, right? Just by clicking in the gutter like normal. And if I put this either equal or triple equal, that would solve my issue, right? If I save this and go back out to Chrome, you can see now, if I go to my inspector and go here to my console, that I get object because I'm kind of looping through all these things, right? These are the objects I'm looping through. But now it doesn't say that my first element is Peter. It doesn't say that because this failed. Because age, in this particular example, right? My first element isn't Peter because I've added Jake to the first, right? So it's failing, which is what it should do. It should fail in this particular case. So questions around these debugging techniques. I've talked about 3 of them, right? Some kind of easy to spot console command. I'm using console.log, right? A little bit more difficult command that I'm doing. I have to do some kind of looping through, right? Comments, I can uncomment. In the book, it tells you can comment out certain sections that you see are not working. We're going to get to this in a second, right? Because we're going to try something today, right? Comment stuff out that's not working, and then comment stuff back in that seems to be working, okay? We'll talk those things through. So that's one thing. That's one way of doing it. We also talked about the debugger that's built into Visual Studio Code. But what other things can you do? I can also, instead of doing a console log, you could do a document.write. Please never do this. Don't do a document.write ever, right? It'll mess you up because if you forget it, it'll just completely mess up your code. So, and it'll be bad. But what you could do, and this is bad, there's limitations to this. Instead of a console log, we could do an alert. Okay, now this is done a lot of times. People see it a lot, something called alert. Okay, the alert is not just an alert. It is actually built in. It's a function that's built into Windows. So what actually we're really saying is window.alert. alert. That's what we're really saying, okay? So let me just go back and do that again. Okay, what is the alert? If I look at the window object, which is the actual HTML document, right, and if I press dot, you can see that I have a bunch of options. One of them is the alert function, right? The alert function, what it does is it creates a dialog box to pop up, right? And then you can put whatever you want to see, any kind of message in, which is a string. Or notice it says any, which means it'll take anything. It'll take a string, it'll take an object, it'll take an array, whatever you want to output. This is a very generic and useful alert kind of pop-up that comes up, right? So I could say something like, first element name, if I want to just the name of the array, and then I could say plus. This is the old way of doing it. I'll show you the new way in a second. So let's go here. So first element name, and then I can say something like my array 0, that's the first element, dot name instead of age. And I want to output this. And when I run it, right, notice it actually already popped up here. It says first element name is Jake. So you could pop up here. But what's the limitation of this, and why do I hate this, right? This is good if you really are stuck and you want to show something that comes up here. But why is this really bad? It's really bad because it interrupts execution of your code, right? So if I press OK, right, it's good. We're good. It continues, right? And if I refresh my page, right, and I refresh my page over and over again, right, it's going to keep coming up. Maybe twice, right? This is bad, guys. We don't want pop-ups. Pop-ups are terrible for user experience. User goes to a page and something pops up that tells them, hey, do you agree that you dealt with the privacy content of the page? You're going to be goddamn page. I'm never going to come here again, right? Remember, if we wait more than 3 seconds, when our attention span nowadays with the internet is about 3 seconds. If we wait for 3 seconds, we're like, that page is broken. Right? So imagine for us to be interrupted by something like this is also very cumbersome. So only do it for debugging. And then the problem is you might forget it. Imagine forgetting this and leaving this in for the client, right? That'd be very bad. I mean, it's something that you'd have to go through and check. Another thing to check. Console, debugging is a little bit less obtrusive. It works. You still see a lot of stuff in the console here. The client won't even need to see it. Worst case scenario, if you forget it, it's here. However, you should clean up the console as well. Any console stuff that's in here for your checks should be eliminated when you're done debugging your application. Because you don't want the client to go in there and go, what? What's his title? What is this? What, by chance, if it ever comes up. Client shouldn't see that anyway, and probably won't know to do this, but you should eliminate this stuff anyway. Also, it slows down your application. Anything like this, even this, slows down your application. So you only want to do it when it's really, really required. So let's get rid of this. We don't care about this anymore, right? Because we've done this, right? And this, check is okay. This alert window is bad. There's one other thing you can put in as well. The alert, notice it returns void. Means that it doesn't return anything. It's just a function that runs, creates the alert, and then stops running when you press OK. There's another one that is actually more useful called confirm, right? So confirm is something else. And if I was to type this in just so you can see the whole thing, so if it's confirm, now notice we know what confirm is, but the full name of it is window.confirm, okay? That's where it comes from. Same thing actually with the console, right? We've been using the console this whole time, but it's actually the window console, right? That's where it really comes from. Window console, and then you can do some kind of command, right? That's what the window console is, right? But here, what we want to use is confirm. So confirm, if you look at it, it says, here's a message. But what does it do? It returns a Boolean. That means it returns either true or false. That's what the confirm does, right? So confirm is like, are you sure? That's more of a valid thing to put up. Why would I use a confirm ever if I was going to use one? I try not to use them either. If I'm deleting something. If I'm in a database and I'm deleting that record, I might put up a pop-up in someone's face, interrupt execution of the code to say, are you sure? Once I delete this record, it's gone for good. Like, for example, are you sure, right? Now, if I just put a confirm like this, there's nothing to do, right? Because it'll just pop up like normal. Are you sure? But it'll give you two buttons, an OK and a cancel, right? The OK button will function as normal. The cancel button will function as normal as well. But both of them will give you very different results. OK will give you a true. Cancel will give you a false. How do I detect that? Well, you can create a variable. Let decision, let's say, is equal to confirm, right? And then let's console log that. Console log my decision. And let's see what I get. Do I get a true or a false, right? Now, remember that I'm using browser sync, so this might come up twice. So here it is. Are you sure? If I press OK, OK, I get a true. That's why it's coming up twice, because of browser sync. Browser sync is light server running in the background. It normally won't happen. But notice I'm getting a true result, right, when I press OK. And if I refresh again and I press cancel, I get a false result, right? So that's OK. That's more of a useful pop-up than an alert. Alert, very ugly, useless pop-up. We don't want to use that because we don't want to give information to the user with an alert. Alerts are the most obtrusive way of communicating with your user, right? The best way of doing it is through your website. Put up something in the website that shows some area that you want to communicate with the user. Okay? So again, we've talked about a bunch of different ways. An alert would be last resort. Please don't use it unless it's absolutely necessary. Okay? What about other stuff? Like what else can we do here? Let's get rid of this. So that's the confirm. And we get rid of the decision. What about other ways? How about in here? Well, here's something else I want you to take a look at. Okay, so inside your console window, there's not just the console window. In fact, if I close this up and open it up again, if I go inspect, right, it actually brings me to inspect my element, whatever element I want. So I can inspect my element this way as well, like we normally do in HTML, right? Notice that in HTML, this is an interactive window. So whatever I do here will be automatically reflected here in real time. Right, you guys should know this already, yeah? Do you guys know this already? I see some people nodding, maybe somehow. That means if I put something in here, like if I actually double click in here and change physically on the browser, instead of it saying COMP125 about COMP125, about me. And if I press enter, you can see that, hey, look, it says about me now. I can physically change the window in real time. So too does it work with debugging. I can physically change all the styles here too. Like I can uncheck them. I can check these margins. I can uncheck all these browser styles if I don't want to use any of them. And I can see an immediate result. You can see that the result of the window will change if I change the CSS styles, right? Okay, that's pretty cool. There's also called DOM breakpoints. There's no breakpoints in the DOM, right? You can see that that's true too. Here's event listeners. I can look at event listeners right here. There's a lot of stuff that's built in here. I've got the click event. I got some click events for the document. You can see that there's a drop down, the modal. These are all things that I've already got, events that are triggering. Why? Because there's a collapse event for this. There's an event that's being triggered whenever I click this thing, right? So there's a bunch of stuff here. DOM breakpoints, properties. I can look at properties right here, right, as well. Here's my elements. I can inspect all of those if I want. And a bunch of other stuff. Okay. But what about sources? What the heck is this? This is really actually quite useful. So in my sources file, I have what looks like an editor and a call stack and a scope and breakpoints, just like I do in Visual Studio Code. So what if I want to put a breakpoint, right? Here we go. Here's a breakpoint. I want to put a breakpoint here inside my browser. I can do that. So the browser window, if I look through, and let's say, for example, I want to know, when I go to my about content, I want to know the value of my array. So let's just go down to here where it says let content equals this. And I want to put a breakpoint on line 59, right? Notice that the breakpoint comes up here. And if I refresh the screen, does the breakpoint go away? Hell no, the breakpoint does not go away, which is really kind of cool. So without using Visual Studio Code whatsoever, you can use the built-in breakpoints that are built into your Chrome. And by the way, Chrome, IE, God forbid, as well as using things like Safari and a bunch of other, all the most modern browsers have all this capability, right? So if you look through this, there's something to note. One, when I'm in debug mode in Chrome, this becomes gray. it becomes grayed out to show that I'm paused in debug mode in my debugger, right? I also show values right here inside Chrome. That's one thing to note as well. So I can still do the same things. Look, there are all my funky keys again, right? I have the same kind of control that I had in Visual Studio Code. I have my call stack. I'm in my about content function. That's what this call stack shows. Remember the first call stack, the first part was this anonymous function on 145, and there's other ones. Then on 137, and then it called the start function, right? And then I called the about content, and you can see that there's a little arrow next to about content to point out that that's the function that I'm currently in. Yes. Yes. You don't need Visual Studio Code to run this. This is independent. And a lot of people do this. They debug right here in Chrome, right? Because it's a lot easier to do. It's by the way, it's platform independent as long as you're using Chrome. It doesn't matter if you're using Visual Studio Code, whatever you're using, it'll all pop up here, which is kind of cool. Here's my local window where my local scope is, and you can see that these are all my variables, right? So it doesn't say variables, it says scope, which is kind of different. There's a closure, a script, and my globals. I also have where my breakpoint is and a bunch of other things, like DOM breakpoints, which I don't have any right now, okay? But you can see that my global is the window. That's the scope of the window, right? Where in my local, my scope, it'll show me different parts of my scope, right? So right now I'm inside my local scope, but it's local scope for what though, right? It's local scope for, if you look at my call stack, the about content function. Okay, it's not local scope for my start function, right? It's my local scope for my about content. And notice if I switch, if I go to about content or start or this anonymous function or whatever I want to click on, it actually clicks and takes me right there. This is really valuable also, right? Because it actually looks through each of these objects, and I'm allowed to go through each of these areas here and get some information. Now it does two things, right? Look on the left and look on the right. So here's my array. I can look actually through my array, right? So if I look at through my name, I can actually focus in on that, and it gives me some weird stuff. Or I can look through it right here. I can look through my array option. I can see all the object values right here without doing a console log. This is the key, without doing a console log, because console logs do not show you everything. They only show you what you've asked to be shown. This shows you everything. And I can create a breakpoint in any place inside my my application. Debugging is just another tool. So this is the debugger for me is another tool I can use. I can still do a step over, right? So I can look at each individual line of code. I can analyze things, and it actually gives you the value right here, which is kind of cool, right? Actually prints these values out. And when I'm done, I can stop debugging like normal, right? So notice where it says deactivate breakpoints. And if I deactivate breakpoints, I can reload my browser, right? So I can stop and reload my browser. And now I don't have to look. There's no breakpoints at all, right? If I take the breakpoint away and refresh, you can see now that there's no breakpoints and I have no information. But I can always put a breakpoint at any time. That's one thing. All right, here's some other options that you can choose. I can choose values right here. Let's write some code online, right? So I want to change my value of Tom. Let's change this to 49. Can I do that? Right? And if I go here, you know, does it print out differently in my console, right? If I want to, yeah. So Tom, right, this is me, right? But what if I wanted to write some code? Like it'll literally in sources, I want to write some code. So can I do this? Let's see if I can do this. I can say for loop, right? For let, you know, index, I'm running it right online, right? Is equal to 0, where index is less than the myArray.length, right? Index plus plus. So I can do this as well. So right inside Chrome itself. And I want to go through my array index. I want to show this in the console, right? Let's do that. So I can go kind of do a console log. And I do my array index, right? And I don't have to save anything, right? Notice it says that there's a little star next to it, which means I've changed something. But if I go to my console now, right? Well, okay, where is it? How come it's not functioning? Can I run this thing? Oops, can I run this thing? The source, I've changed it. So I've done this. Can I save it? I mean, I saved that source. I saved it. I've actually pressed Control S in here. And what about what happens to the console now? Does it do anything here? Right? So far, no. Right? It doesn't do anything. How about if I refresh the page? Will that mess things up? It will. It will. What happened to my real page? Did I actually add in this for loop somehow inside my code? Let's take a look. So here's me. I don't see a for loop here at all, right? I mean, I don't see a for loop at all in my code. So it's not in my code. It's not physically in my code, right? But what about if I refresh? Does that code go away, right? So notice that I had a for loop in there and it's gone, right? So here's my code. No for loop, it's gone, right? But I wrote it in here. I wrote it inside my sources. So why do I bother? Why did I bother doing that? Well, because you can't execute anything in here, right? See this right here? This actually hides the debugger and shows the debugger. This one hides my little kind of application and shows my application. All this stuff is the stuff that you should know. When you know Chrome well enough, you can debug any application, even the ones that aren't yours, by looking through the debugger, right? But notice again, I couldn't physically execute that because when I refreshed my page, all my edits were gone. Okay. So again, if I was going to do that, if I want to show you that one more time, I can type whatever I want. It'll do the command, right? Right? Where index is less than myArray.length. I can check these things out here, and we're index plus plus. Where you can see them though, and I can do like console log myArray index, right? That's what I wanted to show. There's my console log. And notice it says it's not saved. If I press Control S, it saves, but there's nothing to execute. Right? It's nothing to execute. And over here, unless I physically put a breakpoint, like for example, I want to put a breakpoint down there. So this is the breakpoint, and I'm putting the breakpoint in there, but this part is gone. This part is gone. So I've got the breakpoint in there, but again, in my call stack, I got nothing. I can't start debugging unless I refresh, right? So there's nothing for me to physically do here. There's nothing that I can't take it to the next level right here. It only can test some kind of code, right? If it's the right code. But you can do a lot of this testing out here in my console itself. So for example, if I wanted to try something like, I want a random number between 1 and 6. And for video game, any kind of games, we want to always do random numbers, right? Because sometimes we want a random chance for us to hit something. Or a random chance, I'm going to roll a die from 1 to 6. How do I do that? So there's a math.random. So I want to do a, kind of a console log. I can do all that stuff right here, where I go math, dot random, right? Multiply by 6, right? And let's add 1 to it. Let's actually another bracket in here. Again, this is right like live again. You can do this kind of stuff and check some stuff out. I get a number that's 1.7, whatever it is, right? I can do that. It'll give me a number between 1 and 6. So you can check the result out. 1.7, that's not what I want. I want this command, this console command here. Let's just see if I can copy paste. Can I copy paste? Oh, let's see if I can do that. Yeah, I can. And you can check out these things all the time. You can see that I got a number between 1 and 6, right? Okay, but what if I want this to be, I want to change this. I want to change, instead of math.random, I also want to put another thing out here. So let's put another one. And I want to round it down. I want to put a math.floor in there as well, right? So math.floor, math.random, press enter. Now I get a 4. So it takes away all the other digits. I don't care about the dot. I want a number between 1 and 6. Now this is more of a random number, and I can check this out over and over again without making any physical changes to my code whatsoever, right? So that's a 6. Okay, 3. Random number between 1 and 6, right? How about if I wanted to make a function? Can I do that here too, right? And I could say something like, so I can't clear, so I can't do a CLS. I can't clear this stuff, clear immediate or anything like that. So I'm going to keep running down here until you can't see anything anymore. What about if we ran a function? What if we want to make a function, try a function that works right here? Can I do that? So I'm in the About page. And by the way, notice that I'm running in breakpoint mode, right? So if I look at sources, I've got this breakpoint active, and I can just continue, right? And let's refresh the page, go back to my console. All right, and I know that because none of this stuff printed out, right? So let's do some other stuff. Let's go. So I've got my, I want to make a function. I want to check out a function that works a certain way. I'm going to call this like, you know, roll 1d6, like as if I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know. So we can call this, we can make a function called roll 1d6, right? Okay. And in that function, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a console log. Every time I call the function, I want to do a math.floor, math.random. So make actually like this, math.random, right? Times 6, right? We'll add 1 to it, right? So that's the actual console log. And then we'll close up this function. So that's what this function does. And you know what would be really nice? If this value, right? Because roll 1d6 will print it out every single time. Every time I call roll 1d6, we'll have a console out. We could nice if we return something, right? So instead of doing it this way, you know, we can actually test it out where we can take this whole value right here, right? So up to about here. And if we cut it out, and we can create its own variable. So let, you know, number, num equal to whatever that is. I can use a semicolon there and write my little function here. And now what I want to do is to output num, right? I can do that. And I can return num, right? So I can do all that. And all the semicolons do is they just break up the commands, right? So this is my function. I made a function called roll 1d6 and press enter. It's going to say undefined, right? Because that's what the proper thing is to do, right? But now if I call roll 1d6, it actually is inside of my, it's inside of my thing. Now, what did I do here? I didn't call it, I actually referred to it, right? For me to call it, I need to use a calling protocol, which is 1d6, and then the calling parentheses call the function, right? Now that gives me a 2. Let's try again. Gives me 1, 6, right? And it'll keep on calling 1d6, and it'll return that value as well. Notice the return value is right here. So it doesn't return undefined anymore. It's actually returning a value because that's what roll 1d6 is. Okay, so I can actually create my own little function, test it out right here in Chrome without writing one piece of code physically in Visual Studio Code, right? So why am I showing you this? This is another way of debugging. Hey, it worked here in Chrome, but why isn't it working in code? I want to compare the two functions. I wrote it. I might copy and paste. You can actually copy and paste stuff in here as well, and it works like really good. One more thing. Remember that we're always able to get the value of app. My app itself, because I've returned a value, if I press app, I'm returning right now this title, like we talked about before, right? So anything I choose to output, I can put in there, right? But remember, because I'm waiting for my window to load before I assign values, I've got to do things in the right order. Okay, I'm just putting it out there for you guys. Okay, questions so far about the talk stuff? I know this is not the most exciting stuff because when we talk about debugging, you're like, oh God, Tom, we know all this stuff already. I know how to do debugging. Yeah, you're right. You probably do know how to do it, know debugging. But then later on, when we try more difficult stuff, you're going to go back and go, I don't know how to do debugging. I don't know how to find my error. I don't know why this doesn't work. I don't know how come I can't get this. And you know now, this is the way to do it. So if I want to do some other things, I want to hook into my, yeah. No, you can run it. So, okay, so that's a good question. So let's just stop this thing. So I'm stopping Chrome, like looking at my site. And, you know, let's stop Visual Studio Code, right? So Visual Studio Code right now, there's two things going on right now. In my debugger, right, I have my, nothing debugging, but I have my Debug Console, right? There's my Debug Console. Let's run this off. And if I go back to my console itself, by the way, you can view the console, my terminal, by going to View, and I can look at my integrated terminal, right? So if you notice, there's output integrated terminal is Control plus the backtick, right? Control plus backtick. So if I press Control and backtick, I can see it, and I can hide it, and kind of toggle between the two views, right? There it is right here. Notice that I'm running my light server right here. I can stop it. So here's I'm stopping the bash job. So I don't have light server going at all. And I can clear the screen. So I'm going to do a clear or CLS. There we go. So nothing's running. And I want to see it. Well, I can always just go to my operating system file, which is right here, lesson 4A, right? And go double click on an index and it'll run. And it'll run right now because I don't need anything to look at it. The reason why I'm making you guys use light server is because later on, you're going to need it when we do Ajax. Because Ajax won't work locally without using some kind of server properly. And some of the files, my files that I see here, when I'm using light server, it's more closely emulating what it's like on a real server than it is if I just double click on my index.html. Okay? Notice the path is whack, right? Index.html is actually looking at a file. That's all it's doing. It's using it's looking at it as if it's a file, right? It's not really a file. It's a HTML page. That's why I'm doing it that way. But all the regular debug commands are available. If I go inspect, right, as an example, and if I go to my console, I can still see all my console commands and everything else. And if I go to sources, which is the key of what we've been doing here, right? And if I go to scripts, and if I look at app.js, I can still do my debugging like normal. Okay, all the regular debugging things that I did already. Okay, so yeah, you don't have to do it. I do it because you're going to need it later. Okay, so that's one thing. So yeah, so we've talked about a bunch of techniques that allow you to see the error, right? Because this is important. Okay. Any questions so far? Because I'm going to start something new now. This is all the stuff that has been like things we've done. All right. Let's make a contact page, right? And let's see if we can actually catch the errors that we're going to get in the contact page. How do I do that? How do I make a contact page? By the way, you need a contact page for Friday. I've never shown you how to do a contact page. So this is the how to do a contact page day in the next 20 minutes. How do I do that? So one thing to do is this part's done. Let me put this up on GitHub. So again, I'm going to fire this back up. So back to this light server. Firing this up so that we have browser sync. I use browser sync because any changes I make automatically reflect here. I want to add a third page, a contact page, right? And I have some examples of pages here, right? So here's my about page and my index page. My index page is cool, but my contact page is going to be like my about and my index page. Here's the problem that I have. I can't include my navigation yet without using Ajax. I know Ajax, it's something we're going to use later on in the course, all right? But if I want to have unified navigation where I can have my navigation change according to what I'm looking at all the time, and there's a central area for where I'm going to grab my navigation stuff, I can't do it here. I need Ajax for that. I need to be able to load my file from somewhere and then modify my code in one file, one navigation.html file, and then I can kind of inject it in different places. That's what I'd like to do. I'm just really far away from that right now with you guys, right? Okay, so how do I do it the simple way? So the simple way is we have to just copy one of these pages. So I'm going to copy this one, and I'm going to go and then just paste it again. So paste. And when I paste, it's going to make a copy of about1.html, right? So that's one way of doing it. Let's just delete that. The other way is to make the changes first in my index.html and in my about.html. And I think that's smarter because then the changes will be reflected in my copy. I won't have to copy it 3 times, right? So here I have this stuff. This is my header. My header is the exact same. But my nav bar is going to change now. My nav bar needs another link, right? So I'm looking at my index.html. I have my index.html, my about.html. And of course, I'm going to make another one. I'm just going to grab one of these. And I'm going to go here. And I'm going to go into this new page. Instead of about.html, I'm going to make it contact. I don't have this, but I'm going to create it. And instead of FA info circle, which is the font awesome one that I'm going to use, I'm probably going to use FA, some kind of other icon to represent my contacting me. Maybe a telephone or something else, right? And this isn't going to be about, it's going to say contact. All right, let's see if I can search for an icon that looks like that. So I'm going to go to font awesome. So we're building our contact page. And I'm going to look at icons. And if I just put contact in there, I'm not going to do anything. In fact, I got this really weird stuff, right? So let's think about contacting. Icons in Font Awesome and other places are representative of what you want to do. So if I want to have a telephone, right, I can have one of those. There's lots of different kinds of telephones, like contact. Maybe I want to also have email, right, because that's another form of contacting me, right, or or something else, right? So some kind of contact. If I type network, right, there might be some other social network that I want to find. That may not be the one I want, right? So which one do you guys want to use? You want to use a telephone or email or some kind of thing? How about a message? Is there some kind of message you can send? Notice that there's other things too, right? You can use a message, like comments, contact, you want to use telephone? Is that what you said? John?
Yes.
Steve? Sorry, you were behind.
I'd say use one of those bubbles.
You want the bubbles? Okay, let's use how about this open comment thing or the closed comment thing? We'll use one of these comments. So again, to get this in Font Awesome, notice two things. In Font Awesome, it gives you the class, but it also says FAR or FAS. That's wrong. It should be FA. Okay? So don't put FAR or FAS. That's not right. It's FA. Okay? Even if FA doesn't work, right? And notice there's also this F075. That's also something. That's the key code, the Unicode thing for this. Not all of these icons are available because this is using light, right? This is not pro. There's also a pro version of Font Awesome that we can tap into if you want to pay. I don't want to pay right now. This is just demonstration version. I'm not selling it. It was different. Yeah, it was different before. So now it might be not something that's there. So for example, we can test it by saying FA comments, right? And if I wanted to look at this is my index.html page. It doesn't work right now, my index.html page, as an example, but we can see what it looks like. Here's my contact. So it looks pretty good, right? The comment looks like it's good. I like it more than a phone because it's more modern, because maybe you won't call anymore. You can send an email, maybe send a message, something like that. So that might be pretty cool, right? So that's the third thing. But when I click on my About page, there's no link, right? Because we need to put that link in my About page as well, and that's a problem. I don't want to, every time I add a new page, I'm going to put another link. That's crazy, right? That's too much work. In the old days, that's all we had. So we had to add, more stuff. You can also make it so that JavaScript does it for you, right? So it injects the links, right, for you instead of the way it is. So when the page loads, it injects all the links on the nav bar, right? It's just injecting stuff. I can make a hook that hooks into my nav bar, and when my page loads, if it's my About page, it adds the link from my About page, right? And you can have your JavaScript do everything, right? But that's weird, and maybe not the most efficient way of doing stuff. And if JavaScript is disabled, you get no links. That's kind of weird. All right, although nowadays, I don't know why people would disable JavaScript. All right, so my index page looks like it's going to work. It's .contact. I don't have a contact page yet, but I definitely want to get this link, and I'm going to put it in my About page. So I'm going to go to my About page. I'm also going to put this link in there, right? So it's the same link, right? Here's my About page. And now I'm ready to do my contact page because I've got these links already here, right? I'm going to go to my About page, and I'm going to copy and then paste. And then rename, right, my About page. So I can just type rename and change this to contact.html, right? Here's my contact. And notice that just like before, my nav item active has to change. So it can't be about. It's got to change. My nav item active has got to change right now to contact, right? So I just put the active class here. That's something you can change with JavaScript, right? So I've got a class attribute. We haven't done that yet, but I've got a class attribute. That's what this thing is. And then I can change the class attribute depending on which page I'm on, right? That's something we can do. All right, so we got my contact page. My contact page is not going to have a contact page that says Jumbotron. We're not going to have a Jumbotron here. Let's get rid of my Jumbotron, in fact. So my Jumbotron for my contact page is going to be gone, right? Underneath my nav bar, I want to have my contact form. So here's my, oops. Here's my contact form. I don't have this contact form yet, but I want to have it. But this is where it's going to go. And I'm going to go to Bootstrap to help me out. So I'm going to go to Get Bootstrap. And under Get Bootstrap, I'm going to go to Documentation. And I'm going to go to Content. Under Content, you can see that there are tables and different things like that, as well as, so I clicked on the wrong one, components. There is forms. Here's my forms. Under forms, it gives you a short form for email and password and submit. Not exactly what we're looking for at all. Here's something of a text area, which is kind of cool. So we got a text area example here. And you can see that the code for the text area is here. So we're going to grab this one eventually as well. There's also different sizes you can do. This really cool stuff that you can put together. But for now, what I want is this form right here. So I'm going to copy this form. And I'm going to inject it right here. All right, so here's my form. This form is not correct, like we talked about, right? It's not correct because it has some stuff that we don't need. First of all, I don't want an email address as my contact, first. All right. By the way, if you don't finish today, I'll continue tomorrow, because I know I'm running like 209 right now. So my form group is important. So I've got a div tag that separates my elements. There's also this small tag here that says, we'll never share your email address. Let's just take this out for now. Okay, so we don't care about this. Okay, so here's enter email. We've got this form group, right? And this form is going to be like right next to the edge of my page because I haven't surrounded my form with any kind of container for Bootstrap, right? So we'll do that container next. But notice that it says there's a for attribute that points to the input. So there's two parts of the form, right? Each form element. Here's my form elements separated now. There's three form elements. There's my email address, my password, and some kind of checkbox. I think the checkbox can go. We don't care about this. There's also this submit button, submits the form, but we're not going to submit a form. We want to send my message. So this should just say send, right? So that's what this should say. This is a button primary, which is a blue button, okay? I know that. And this is wrong. Example input email and example input password. I don't want that. I want to keep my email, so I want to copy this for a second because I want to have an email contact. But I want to kind of maybe do first name, last name. Like maybe that's what I want to do, first name, last name, and then, or maybe name, worst case scenario, contact number. Let's do name and contact number. So this will be like, name with a capital N. We could say full name. That's going to be the new variable name. That's what the variable name is going to be called. Notice my ID, right, is example input email. We want my full name and my ID to match. And area described by email. Let's just get rid of my email help. We don't care about that for now. I'm taking area away for a second. Not that I don't want to do, accessibility. I want to do that, but I'm going to do it differently later. I want to use the name attribute. The name attribute is also going to be full name. Name is going to be the main variable name. If you don't have name, then you can never capture this variable, right? So the variable that we want to capture is called full name. So the name attribute must be full name as well. Okay, and so is the ID in this case. So we can hook into it. Okay. Here's my placeholder. Enter full name or enter your name. How about that? That's what's going to appear inside of the input field. All right. And we also want to make this required. Right? Required means that it's going to not allow me to submit the form unless this element has been filled out. Okay. So that's the form itself, right? We also want to add in some other things before the form. I'm going to go back to this in a second. It's not going to say email address, by the way. It's going to say, full name. Yes. Auto what? Autofill. 1 second. We'll go back there in a second. I also want to make an H1 tag that says contact us. Right? There's my H1 tag. So this is above the form. And maybe an H4 tag that says something like with a star that says all fields are required. Right? All fields are required. But some kind of breakpoint in there. I'm just going to put this. I'm just kind of, kind of doing this. Maybe a div tag that surrounds everything with a class of container, right? And what I want is for this form, this whole form itself, everything including the the buttons and everything. I want to move this whole form and the H1 element inside here. A couple ways I can do that. I can cut paste, or if I press, I believe, Alt and up, my up arrow, I can actually move in there, right? So I actually move elements around, so I can do that, right? That's kind of a Visual Studio Code thing. Actually might work with Visual Studio. All right, so I'm in that. I'm inside this form. I've got my form elements. I've got my full name, my email address. That's cool, email address, but this is no good. This has got to be email address. So let's do that. That's what it's going to be, email address. I copy that in here. Let's get rid of the area for now. Come back to that. My name is going to be email address. That's important. And enter email is correct. Also the type. Notice the type here. It says email. In mobile devices and special keyboards will come up. Type email will bring up an email keyboard on a mobile device, where my type for full name should be text, right? So that's the regular text keyboard that will come up, right? So I want email address. I also want, I don't care about password, so this can go, because password doesn't make any sense, right? I do care about telephone number. So I want full name, telephone number, email address, text area, you know, for things. So those are at least the bare minimum that I want, right? So I'll put that back in there. I'll copy paste. Instead of full name, I'll make this contact number. Contact number. Right? And instead of for full name, it'll be for contact number. You can see the pattern, right? So I'll put that in there and there. And of course, my placeholder isn't going to be enter your name. It's going to be enter your contact number. Contact number. And email is also going to be required. And enter your email address, what it should say there. And we can also give instructions to the user, the format that I want to enter the email address for now. I haven't done that. And then now we're missing the text area. So I'm saving this. I'm going to go back to here. And notice under form controls, there is this text area. And I want to grab the text area that's on the page. So here's my text area right here. This is an example text area. I'm going to copy this, go back here and paste it in because I'm a little bit lazy. I could have probably typed that in myself, but what the heck. And then here, this will be message. That's what the text area is. And then enter message. Right, that's what this is going to say. And this is a form control, but notice it's a text area, not an input, which is the key. And I'm using rows 3. So this is the same. So message is the ID. And my name is also message. Okay. So now I've completed my form. But this is the basic user interface you're going to need for your stuff on Friday. Is that a hand? Yeah, tell me. I recommend it for the ones that you want. Like, for example, maybe the message is not as important. To me, it is important because with no message, then you're just going to get an email, you know, as an example. So I'm going to put required in here as well. Okay, okay, great. So here's my button, right? This is my form. What does it do? How does it look? I haven't even checked that out yet. Well, let's check it out. So I'm going to go back to my page, right? I've made all these changes, but how does my page physically look? Well, now I've got these 3 pages. And if I click home, I got the page, I got about, and I got contact. There's my contact page, right? Yeah, you know, this is not right. Look how big it is. It's like really way out here. It's kind of wacky. It does put this in a little bit here, but I definitely want this to be limited in terms of how big it is. Like put it inside of a card or something is what I want, right? Still pretty good. If I click send though, it's going to give me this automatic thing that says, hey, it's not valid. If I start putting my name, right, my contact number, 416-555, you know, 5555, such a number, and then my address with tom@example.com. Sorry, I'm recording this too. And my message, hello. And if I click send, it's just going to wipe it out. Now, on autofill, if I start typing it again, it doesn't do anything right now because my autofill is not enabled, right? So that's the one thing. So one thing is notice that, I mean, I'm going to have to type this in every single time. If I type Tom, but if I click send, it's going to go to this one because that's what the required does for each one of these things. You should know this from HTML when you took your COMP125. It's all the regular stuff, right? Great thing about Bootstrap is it's responsive, right? So the form is now a responsive form that works on mobile devices as well. But one thing we're missing is some kind of container. And inside Bootstrap, we used to have something called cards, right? So notice that there's cards. Here's the card container, and here's some examples of cards. And here's the way the cards work. It's a div with a class of card and a style with a width, a specific width you can specify. You can also not specify width, and that's fine too. The width that you specify will make the card a certain size, whatever that is, right? So you can also specify this style. Instead of doing it here, you can specify it somewhere else. But what it will do, it'll create this little border around the card itself to make it look like that. And there's some example other cards down in here. Okay. It basically separates the actual object itself and puts it inside. We'll talk about this next day. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this up on GitHub, right? So you can see what the cards look like, right? And again, this is just a styling thing. It's by no means required, other than I probably don't want to make this too wide. And what I can do also is I can create another div tag that creates a row, right? And inside my row, I can make it so that my I can specify that how many columns my form will take up. That's another thing I can do, right? And we'll do that tomorrow when we get together, all right? But for now, my form doesn't do anything, right? And there's no content, right? And I'm going to get an error if I want to try and do anything. Like if I actually go back out to my page here for a second, and if I refresh, you can see that if I go to inspect, I don't really have anything, and I'm getting this funky little error here that says uncaught type error, cannot set property text content of null at about content, right? And at start, look, it's giving me an error, right? And this is the error we're going to handle tomorrow. Okay, so I want to leave it like this for tomorrow. Let's put this up on GitHub, and we'll stop for today. So again, for GitHub, I'm just going to use the internal stuff. I added contact page. Right, I'm going to hook all these things in there. Click this, and then push this up to GitHub. And you guys should have that in a second. Any questions before we go? Guys, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Sure.